This is the sermon for June 25th, 2023. I'm going to be preaching on Matthew 10, 24 to 39. Matthew 10, 24 to 39. And this is entitled The Sharp Wisdom of Jesus. So these are some hard words, some hard teachings. So from Matthew 10. Jesus said, "A student doesn't get a better desk than the teacher. A laborer doesn't make more money than the boss. Be content, pleased even, when you, my followers, get the same treatment I get. If they call me Dungface, what can my followers expect? Don't be intimidated. Eventually, everything is going to be out in the open, and everyone will know how things really are. So don't hesitate to go public now. Don't be bluffed into silence by the threats of bullies. There's nothing they can do to your soul, your core being. What's the value of a sparrow? Some loose change, right? And God cares what happens to each sparrow. You're worth more than 1,000,000 sparrows. Don't think I've come to make life cozy. I've come to cut through cozy domestic arrangements and free you for God. If your first concern is to look after yourself, you'll never find yourself. But if you forget about yourself and look to me, you'll find both yourself and me." So, how would you describe these sayings of Jesus, these teachings, this wisdom of Jesus? Try to put the passage in your own words. So, if the world treats Jesus like Dungface, is how Eugene Peterson in The Message translated it. I don't know what the Greek is, but I think it is kind of like that SH word that we tend to say, excrement. If the world treats Jesus like that, then what do you expect as Jesus' followers? So there have been times in history, not currently, but there have been times in history when the followers of Jesus were treated with great disrespect based on how they treated Jesus. So, so anyway, what do you expect? And then Jesus, in my words, Jesus goes on to say, don't give in to bullying by opponents. The truth will come out. So tell the truth now, is what Jesus is saying. Bullies can kill the body, but not take your soul. Now that's a hard saying for sure. And then Jesus goes on to say, in my words, you are treasured. Being my follower is tough. It'll hurt. It'll be full of conflict sometimes, but it's worth it. I give you life that matters, life that lasts. So that would be my paraphrase, but you're welcome to look up Matthew 10:24 and following, and then put it into your own words. I've included it in the YouTube video notes, the passage from Eugene Peterson. So yeah, I encourage you. Some of the words that would describe these sayings would be bitter or bleak, grim, hard, severe, sharp, like I titled the sermon, Sharp Wisdom of Jesus, strident perhaps, coarse, disturbing, grating, definitely some of that. So they're definitely hard words. And part of the passage that says bullies can kill the body but not the soul. We get wounded by bullying, and we need to find healing from it in order to have the courage to stand up to them. And it's a hard thing. It's a real hard thing. It's a hard thing to deal with what bullies will do. And then to stay true to the integrity, to the core. This reminds me of the book Life is So Good, which is the story of George Dawson, who didn't learn to read until he was 98 years old. He had grown up in Texas in post-slavery times, and he had to go to work to help his family when he was young. And so he went to work, and he didn't get to finish school, so he didn't really learn to read. His siblings did. They went to school, but he didn't. He was a hard worker. But if you read the book Life is So Good, which is not a long book, I highly recommend it. All the times in his life, when he looked back over his nearly 100 years, he would remember the times he held on to his integrity, in spite of when it would have been easier to fold and to do the wrong thing. He held on to the integrity, which cost him. He never had much money. He had enough to live on. He had enough to get by. He had enough to raise kids and take care of 3 different wives, I think. He was widowed a number of times in his long life. But he had enough, but it cost him, doing the right thing cost him his comfort, money, social judgment. But he held on to his integrity, and he was an example to me and to others through that book. I look up to people like that. Jesus is teaching his followers that when push comes to shove, they can be mean to your body, your opponents, but they can't take away what is most precious, your soul, what really matters most. These are definitely hard teachings of Jesus. We can imagine that followers of Jesus in the early church, so after Jesus' death and resurrection, after Pentecost, after the times that the church was being established in small groups, after that time, when push came to shove, things were very difficult, and the early followers of Jesus were persecuted. So this passage in Matthew and others like it were being written down in hard times. Bold language, black and white kind of language. And we have to be careful not to take those words in our comfort and say, oh, I'm being persecuted because, who knows what. They're not allowing me to say Merry Christmas or something. That's not persecution. So we don't want to mistake mild disagreements with persecution. It's pretty comfortable to be a Christian these days. We give up we give up our Sunday mornings rather than sleeping in or spending the morning reading the Sunday paper, enjoying our coffee. But we aren't fired from our jobs. We might give up some income to support the church. I hope we do, because the church matters. But we have a government that supports retirees, so that we don't have to do that as Christians. We don't have to do all of the social work of caring for the least, the last, and the lost. But in the early church, they knew sacrificial giving because there wasn't the supports of Social Security and other things that we have now. So we pay taxes for that as well. It might be difficult to imagine what it was like for the early Christians, but we can still learn. And today I want to focus on the last of all these teachings of Jesus as especially relevant for us. Jesus said, if you focus on yourself, you'll lose yourself. So don't think that I've come to make your life cozy. Instead, I've come to cut through cozy domestic arrangements and free you for God. So whatever we're attached to, we have to balance it with a radical attachment to what God wants. Jesus said, if you forget about yourself and look to me, you'll find both yourself and me. These are hard words. We're all addicted to ego, as I'm fond of saying. We want things our way. We know the right way. We want to enforce that. We want things to line up with what we know is right. And we have gained some wisdom in all of our experiences over the years. But we also tend to be anxious people. We tend to like tight control of things. And it's natural to center ourselves. That's a survival instinct. That is not bad. But as Christians, we learn that humans survive better if we gather together, if we gather our resources, if we learn to cooperate, if we learn to get along, if we prioritize others along with taking care of ourselves. I see lots of people in all of my years that are not church-going, but they're good, strong community people. They may not even believe as Christians or Jews or religious people. They may not believe, but they still prioritize other people. So you don't have to be, Christians don't have a corner on righteous or good behavior. But I still think it helps us. I'm a weak person. I'm not as strong as some of the community people I've known over the years that I admired. I'm not as strong as that. I need the church to remind me, to help me, and for us to band together to make a difference. In the United Methodist Church, we have UMCOR, UMCOR, United Methodist Committee on Relief. And we have warehouses and trucks, and when there's a disaster, we load up the trucks as United Methodists. The trucks are loaded, sometimes by volunteers, sometimes by paid employees, and they start driving them to the area of the disaster. And that's why these warehouses are situated strategically. So I think it's great. We have Africa University. They're training teachers and engineers and agriculture experts and ministers and missionaries. They're training all kinds of people to make the world a better place. So we do that by banding together. And, like I said, I'm not as good a person as some of the community-minded people. So I know that I need support. And I'm learning a lot in the last couple years about meditation and quiet and loosening my ego. Nobody's going to be perfect at this, but letting go of how ego controls, my way or the highway kind of thinking, and loosening that. I'm very grateful to be learning how to be more mindful and less worried. So that's an immediate response in my life that I'm learning both from the church and from meditation that science has figured out is very helpful. The mindfulness has allowed me to pray in new ways and to understand prayer more deeply. I really think that Jesus traveled with the disciples so that he could teach them at a deeper level than what church people get at 20 minutes or an hour a week. Or let's say they spend 5 to 10 minutes every day with a meditation. That's good. That's important. But I think Jesus living and traveling with his disciples, he was forming them into disciples in ways that are deep. Now, this reminds me of the experience we had in Girl Talk, God Talk this week, where one person in the group decided to be vulnerable and to share with the whole group her life and her struggles and what she's learned and how she's grown. And then I invited other people to share if they wanted to. And everyone in the group shared and deepened our bonds as a group. It deepened our trust, our enjoyment of one another, our appreciation and our respect for one another. That's the kind of formation that can happen among disciples. And I want to see that in the church. Let's nurture that even more in the church. So mindfulness has allowed me to pray in new ways. And the church offers resources. And I know you all have resources too for us to draw close. And of course we have more than the church. We have our families, we have our close friend groups, we have neighbors, people that we turn to and depend on, which is a beautiful thing. That's part of what I enjoy in the church, and we have it in more than the church. But let's strengthen it wherever we find it. So our churches are going through tough times for lots of reasons. And yes, in the church we can choose to circle the wagons against the enemies and keep outsiders out and just become a clique of people that support one another. Now, even cliques serve an important purpose. But as the church, we can be open to outsiders. Listen to what Jesus said. Don't be bluffed into silence by the threats of bullies. There's nothing they can do to your soul, your core being. How do we strengthen the core being of one another, our own core selves, our souls? How do we strengthen that? The world is not a kind place. And so strengthening that in the face of great difficulties. I think even when illness and hospitalization comes, treatments for cancer, when these things come, we can reach out to one another and support those that can't stand on their own. But let's strengthen each other and the church now, before the greatest difficulties come. I hope that bad times won't come. I hope that we'll continue as we are. But looking back through history, I see that there are going to be even tougher times coming. Followers of Jesus will have developed all kinds of ways to be stronger in compassion and self-giving. Amen. Amen.